say deride? Deride, okay, is to ridicule, to mock, to scorn. The opposite of that would be to praise. All right, so deride. It says the unpopular professor derided students who made mistakes. All right. Number 2. So what could you draw for deride? You can draw what Noble's saying. Okay, that's fine. What else could you draw? You could draw a synonym. Right? You can. All right, number 2 is censure. Please say censure. Censure is a verb to criticize sharply. Notice it is not censor, which means to ban. All right, it's different. All right, so it also means condemn, reproach. The opposite is to praise and applaud. So the judge censored the repeat offender for his criminal behavior. All right, so notice they're really kind of similar, 1 and 2. But censure, again, criticize sharply, ridicule, kind of a mocking for deride. All right, so censure is maybe more of a, how can I say it? Someone will be censured who definitely maybe deserves it. Derision, probably never, people should not be derided. All right, 3 is, what could you draw for censure? Your word is censure.
Draw the synonym.
You could write the synonym, condemn, reproach. You could maybe draw the judge's gavel, coming down on the little stick figure guy. All right, 3 is gamble. Please say gamble. Gamble is a verb to frolic, to romp about playfully, to play, to caper, to rollick. I think of just children running on the meadow somewhere. The preschoolers like to gamble about on the playground. So again, you can just draw stick figures running around, having a good time. You could write play, caper, or rollick. All right, 3 is immolate. Please say immolate. Immolate is a verb. Now, guys, these words, we're just going all over English language. To kill someone as a sacrificial victim, usually by fire. Now, there is no synonym for that. So if your word is that, I guess you can draw some Buddhist monks, maybe, putting themselves on fire, right? Okay, immolation is not a good thing. All right, finally, recondite. Please say recondite. Recondite is a adjective meaning difficult to understand, profound. Notice there's no synonym for that either. Only a few students understood the recondite explanation of the theory. So again, something that shows that it's difficult to understand. What could you draw to show that?
A confused face.
Sure, confused face with question marks. Yeah, I agree a lot. I do. Anything for a recondite? Anything else? Martinet. Please say martinet. Martinet is a noun, a strict disciplinarian, a taskmaster. The teacher was a martinet who never made exceptions to the rules. All right, martinet. So what could you draw for martinet?
Switch.
Well, I mean, he goes by the rules. We go by the handbook. So we could maybe draw the handbook in someone's hands, little stick figures' hands or something. That's right.
You really like stick figures.
Because that's all I can draw is stick figures at most.
I can make squares look like circles.
Okay, really? Quagmire, please say quagmire. Quagmire is a noun. Isn't it a character on one of the shows?
Yeah.
Hey Arnold.
Family Guy.
Oh, Family Guy. Is it Family Guy?
It's Family Guy. Let's not bring back.
Let's not, because the show it wouldn't go into such, like when he starts thinking the bubbles, that's when it's bad, because it's bad enough, but then it goes really bad. Quagmire is noun is a swamp, a difficult or inextricable situation. So quagmire, the war was a political quagmire for 3 U.S. presidents. So you could draw a swamp there. All right, job, please say job. Job is a verb to scoff, to ridicule. We have so many of these words that are similar. To jeer, taunt, sneer. The opposite of that would be to compliment and praise. His favorite pastime was to job at everything his wife said. That was a very pleasant marriage. So job, what could you draw for job?
Snooty face.
Snooty face. A sneer, kind of up that top lip is kind of curled. You could simply write jeer, taunt, or sneer. Okay, a gate. Please say a gate. Agape is an adjective. Open mouth, surprised, agog, which means open mouth, astonished. Simply draw someone's mouth, little stick figure face, little face. His mouth is open, right? He's agape. All right, carcinogen. Please say carcinogen. Carcinogen is a noun. It means causing cancer. It says benzene, a component of gasoline, is a carcinogen.
Oh,
All right, so what could you draw for carcinogen?
technically nothing, because nothing causes cancer. Things are saturated.
Yeah. So what?
So,
So what could you draw for carcinogen?
Cigarette.
people,
Cigarette, for sure.
because people are dancing.
Well, it seems to be. Olfactory. Please say olfactory. Olfactory is an adjective pertaining to smell. If you have a cold, then your olfactory senses will not detect the gas leak. Right? Olfactory. So you could draw. I would just draw a nose. That's what I would draw. Okay. All right. Next, let's see. Okay, guys. So here we have imperious. Please say imperious. Imperious is an adjective domineering and haughty, overbearing, arrogant, masterful. So the opposite of this is servile, or as the British pronounce it, servile, and submissive. All right. So the judge pronounced his findings in an imperious voice. So what could you draw if your word is imperious?
The cat laying on its back.
Cats can be haughty. They really can. They don't really want to go, don't they?
That doesn't have to do anything. It's just
All right. Grotesque. Please say grotesque. Grotesque is an adjective meaning absurd, distorted. The boy made a grotesque face behind the teacher's back. All right. So then there again, just, you could draw someone who is, yes. All right. Neologism. Please say neologism. Neologism is a noun, a new word or expression. Notice it has, new in it. Coinage. It says some writers coin neologisms to confuse and impress their readers. Shakespeare would he would invent words as well, and we still use some of them. All right, finally is hackneyed. Please say hackneyed. Hackneyed is an adjective, commonplace, overused. All right, so we say these are trite. Good as gold is a hackneyed expression. The opposite of hackneyed is fresh and imaginative. So just take a few minutes, please, and do those, complete those cards. Who does not know their word? Okay. Guys, if you have color for them, that would be really great.
Oh, that's me.
Luther, this is what I think it is. This is.
Yeah, you left it at home.
I'm gonna staple it. I'm gonna put it with the others.
All good, dog.
We're gonna make a birthday card.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
It was just.
Okay, guys, when you finish that, go ahead and go to the vocabulary. We're going to do the first 5 words on this,
Oh, right.
the sentences. And I'm not going to read every one of them because this class is so large, but I will go back and check them. And if they're not, not used correctly, I will make a note or I'll correct it for you. We'll just read a few sentences for each word. Okay, so go ahead and after you finish your card, go ahead and write a sentence for the first 5. Now on Wednesday, Miss Little is going to come talk to you all, and she typically takes about an hour-ish, talk to you about college, applying for scholarships, applying for jobs, all these opportunities, your FAFSA, things that you need to know. So that'll be Wednesday. And so my virtual people, same thing. I mean, you're going to hear everything that she says, and I'll try to put my computer. She wants to stand typically in the middle of the room. I'll try to put my camera where you can see her as well. All right. So that's going to be Wednesday. And then typically she'll leave us a little time that we'll do the next 5 words. We might have time to go ahead and watch a little bit more of Dr. Masalo's podcast on Wednesday, but probably not very much of it. So that's Wednesday. Friday is our library day. So we will meet in the library. I will have a sitting chart for you that I will share with you on Wednesday. So you'll know where to go in and sit. You won't be like, oh, where do I sit? We have to have seating charts, so I'll have that done for you guys on. I know, but yes. Okay, so my virtual kids, you will also be able to access the library I'll have the camera turned on and you can ask questions and things like that. Guys, but listen, on Friday, everyone will need, of course, as always, to check in because we'll be also doing the STAR testing on Friday before we check books out to get that finished. That sets your goals up for the 9 weeks.
There's nothing to make reading miserable. I used to enjoy it once upon a time, and then y'all wanted testing over everything. Y'all know how to kill joy, don't you?
I see that. I understand that. Just pretend like it's not there. How about that, Lee?
Yeah, doing that gets you big zeros.
Well, I don't mean that. I mean when you're reading a book, just forget that it's really.
Trust me, I did forget it was not there for a while. Almost spelled English.
I don't want you to do that.
Fifth grade.
I understand what you're saying, though.
And then you wonder why no one likes to read. That's the worst part.
I see your point. You got a valid point.
No, they don't like reading, so we should test them more.
I understand. I hear you. I hear you.
I think personally, if they're good at reading and they have talent, then they should have a lower test score because that means they're reading enough as it is. You should make it the ones that have a more struggling time read more often. That way it fixes and catches up to where you should be. Of course I do. Because I think of what's fun. I don't go, money.
I understand. Guys, if you're finished with your card, I'll come by and pick it up. If you're not, any more cards, that's fine. Make sure your name is on it. Okay?
It's on the on.
Make sure your name is on it, please.
And now that song is stuck in my head. Oh, I should slap
Everyone
it.
should put in the chat or email your picture.
Put it in the chat, bro.
Too late. I read the whole sentence.
I know, that's what I said. about the
Too
first
late.
one. Right, me choosing good school. I said, I can and I will.
Will and happy to do so. Oh my gosh.
Reading yourself, putting attention.
Okay.
It just,
Let me check on my virtual folks really fast. Y'all doing okay, everybody? Virtual? Okay. Guys, we're going to read these in just a moment, and then we will start watching a podcast where you'll be taking notes and putting it in your journal that is in Classroom.
Not at all. At all. Somebody's gonna put censure.
Mm-hmm.
You really don't know the word.
Which one are we talking about?
Perfect. Tracker, that's a perfect example of censure. That's good. Kind of give a little scolding there on correcting. That's censure. That's
You
good.
blame my little sister for making me watch that movie.
I don't care.
I don't care.
I am blaming you and I'll do so happily. Your knee.
But here's the real question, are you ever happy?
Do I like how I'll be asking the question.
Setting chart.
Cuddly.
Good.
Someone
Very good. That's such a good one. There's no name on this one.
Religion would
I forgot to put my name on that.
Christianity.
There was probably
I was thinking Nazis, but.
I'm not wrong though. Y'all killed a million.
No,
Ancestors
and
are
that was
alive.
the church.
And killed. The church was led by you.
By you personally?
And I mean, the people who don't know, the church was like, we're gonna do this now. The guys are like, we already have the torch.
Okay, guys, by the way, as we're doing our sentences, just a reminder that our school now is hosting the ACT. So if you need or you want to take the ACT, then I would really recommend you signing up to take it here. You don't do it any differently, just get on the website and you would choose the west side as your testing site.
Oh,
So
you to assume I'm taking it again.
that would be really good. Well, or taking it, you can take it.
I broke my hand.
Oh, so you couldn't.
I couldn't take
You're
it.
going to sign up to take it.
Probably not.
Oh, you should.
Maybe you could have taken it. Probably not.
No,
Awesome.
I said, you should take it. You should.
I don't really need to.
You go to the ACT.org.
Not really necessary. I mean,
Nice.
that was really,
I think I just spelled big.
that was really.
So guys, ACT.org and you sign up. Also, there are a couple of free places out there to practice for the ACT. One is ACT.org. The other is Academy, ACT Academy or AcademyACT.org. And what's great about that one is you'll take a little practice test and then we'll focus in on what you're weak on, what you need to tweak. We'll just give you those problems to work on. So whether you're just wanting to get up a couple of points in an area, that will help you.
Need a few points.
Yes.
Yes,
Cost
the big dump.
ACT, let me see, currently. Yes. Yes.
So if everybody here has free lunches, don't we all get 2 free pastries?
I don't know how that with the program with code and how that's working with that. That's a very good question. And this little question for Wednesday, she's coming for Wednesday. So guys, these questions like that you have for her, I don't care to Google look them up, but this is something that she can tell you, right on. But I really want y'all to, if you haven't taken the test, if you want to tweak your score, please take it here. It's an advantage taking it at your home school because you're already your school more relaxed.
It's like 70.
What is it?
The ACT.
$70? You must have. Okay, well, you took the writing, I guess, with it. Okay, $62.50, guys, and do not, if you do the late fee, it's like $29.50. Then try to register. You need to register ASAP.
Oh, yes, I love paying for a test.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I
Nothing
know.
like giving you my time
They're
and my money.
profit. So it's around $46, no writing, and then with writing at $62.50.
Just the more you tell me about it, the less I want to take it.
Well, I'm gonna stop talking about it.
Like, oh, yes, you should take it. It's $70-something.
I mean, it's going to give you a lot. It's going to give you a lot of money.
But you can probably take it, Miss Little has vouchers.
She does.
It isn't. My point is, though, I can go to a trade school, not take that, and still probably get a job better, considering most college people that complete them don't get jobs in the area they're wanting.
Well, if that's why it's important, you do whatever you want to do. That's what I'm getting you to think about it. But I would say it's a good
But that's the
idea.
thing, is you don't talk about trade schools. You talk about college. Things like trade schools. You're starting to talk about it now, but trade schools aren't talking about it. Things like jobs that are necessary. Like I have never heard a teacher say, be a mortician or an undertaker.
We don't want to tell anybody to be a certain.
But that's the thing, is you're not giving, because people are gonna die, no one's gonna lose that job.
You're right. They're an accountant because you have to die, pay taxes. Those are two for sure things. But you're right. And we're trying to do better. We're trying to turn that boat around and say, hey, do what you love to do. And that business wants you to be passionate about it.
It's a slow turning boat though.
It is, Luther. It's a long turning boat. You're right.
But some jobs you have to have it. Someone who doesn't have a degree will not get this job over someone who has a degree.
That's can be the case as well.
Degree or a
Sure.
master's degree, you will get the job.
It doesn't matter though, because even then you can usually go to a technician school for either cheaper or free, or there are even jobs you get apprenticeships for. Yes, it will take longer, but it will usually cost nothing but a union law.
What are the items you know again? Hey guys, listen. Guys, I was in a restaurant. I had a student come up to me that she had graduated the year before, and she said, "Tell your kids to be sure and do the FAFSA, take their ACT," because she wasn't going to college. She was set to go do something else. She changed her mind midsummer because you're, no offense, but you're young. You're young adults, and your brain doesn't even quit growing until you're after in your 20s. So sometimes your decisions change. So I think it's good to just plan B. Always have a plan B on the backup. You may not use it, but you have it.
Okay, so if you don't do ACT, like, you can't.
The ACT, they want you to have an ACT score to get in.
What if you don't?
Well, that's just a prerequisite. You need to take it before you
You
get
should
it.
have an ACT or SAT, you get into college, like,
It's just like,
I understand.
we're not trying to tell you, your brain isn't finished developing. We know it's best.
No, not that either. But you can change your mind.
Yeah, no, the problem is, like,
I understand what you're saying. I know.
it's built up in a way that it's like, there's a massive picture, and then maybe if you push this massive sculpture art
You're saying
out of the way, it's barely noticeable.
Selling a lie.
Not necessarily selling a life, but you're pitching an idea and a hope and dream that you're not pitching the reality of the failure with that said dream. Because you're throwing out this idea that college will do this, college will do that.
You can't go into something though. I mean, it's got to be hard work and that. I mean, if the person just, I have a 36 months, can I sit around?
I mean, technically, no.
You have to keep working.
Yes, keep working and keep in the hopes of it. However, you can't tell them if you're going to college, that'll be good. You have to tell them the reality. Yes, you're going to college, but the chances of failure are still the same.
It's competitive. It's competitive out there, yes.
The problem is that for some reason, the government, the world is perfectly fine telling these and feeding the hopes and the dreams, so when people crash down, they give up. Look, trust me, I'm one of them.
We're trying to be better as a country. And as
This country is not trying to do better. I've seen the, don't lie to me.
All right. Well, we're trying. I gotta be positive a little bit. Okay, guys, let's read our sentences. Okay, tracker, guys, unless you tell me no, I don't want to read your sentence. I'm not gonna read every one of them either. So don't get your feelings hurt if we don't read your sentence. We're just gonna read, just a few. So tracker, do you want to read yours? Guys, listen.
I derided the boy for being so clumsy.
Okay, derided the boy for being clumsy. Again, what does deride mean?
Mock.
To mock. All right, Noble.
Uh,
Noble, do you want to read your sentence?
Yeah, sure.
Number.
Do not deride me for choosing to go to school.
Very good. All right, Shannon. In the future, I will not deride anyone to make people feel worthless. Good. And Madison? The little kids derided the old man. And Autumn? The winning team had bad sportsmanship and derided the other team. Okay, guys, that's very good. I think we understand derided now. All right, censure. And I know the same people are probably in the same order, so I will, I'm going to start with tracker. I'll skip around a little bit of the tracker.
Teacher censor the students with shorts on.
Perfect example of censure, because it's like they did do something against the rule or wrong, so they're being reprimanded. Censure, different than derided. Derided is mocking. There's more meanness behind derided. Censure is just something that probably needs to be done.
You need to fix that.
All right, Shannon. The mayor censured the old building. Okay.
Well, I mean, is it?
Are you using censor like bandit? Okay, so we need to make sure we don't confuse censor,
What I said.
C-E-N-S-O-R, to censure, right?
Condemned is a synonym, so would it still fit?
Well, I guess it would. The mayor condemned.
Condemn the old building.
Okay, well, but not, I don't know that it's in that form. Like,
You should not have.
I know.
And you still wonder why I screwed myself.
I understand. Okay, censured workers. Okay, Madison, my boss censured me while I worked. And Sadie writes, the employee was censured for not wearing the appropriate clothes. Okay, Autumn, the girl was censured for going out in public knowing she tested positive for corona. Very good. So guys, again, censure, again, what does censure mean? To criticize sharply, all right, and deride is mock. All right, gamble. All right, Tracker.
The 9-year-old gambled around his new backyard.
Good. And Madison writes, the dogs like to gamble at the park. Shannon, the men always gamble about the women. Okay, they dance around and they frolic about. The cat loved to gamble with the dogs. Okay, great. All right. Okay, immolate. Immolate means to do what?
Yes.
What does a frolic mean?
Frolic means just kind of run playfully. Frolicking. You're not really going to a certain spot. You're just kind of having fun frolicking around the daisies or yeah, just kind of the sound of music. Other running, doing that. Okay, guys, let's listen. All right, Tracker's reading his sentence.
The church immolated the victim of sins.
Perfect example. All right, very good. And Shannon writes, ancient tribes used to immolate widows and sacrifice and burn their bodies. You meant widows there? And their bodies. Okay, no, let's see.
I mean,
Old cultures used to immolate men. Okay, very good. There again, probably not a word you're going to use very often, but it's good to know what it
yes, but
means.
it's so important to know.
Recondite. Recondite. Tracker writes, nobody understood the recondite pop quiz. And the class did not understand the recondite speech. And let's see. The math was recondite. Okay. I'm moving on. Okay, that's all today. Okay, I'm moving on. Guys, listen, finish your sentences. I will correct them. I will read them and
Then we
so make sure you do those 5.
There's just a highlighted I in the middle.
Okay.
In between there.
All right, so guys, what you're going to need, go ahead and keep your Chromebook out. You are going to need it for, I'm going to show you something first. When I tell you to put your notes in your journal, it's going to be basically this right here. And if you go to classwork, it's on the side of topics, journal. This is probably going to go underneath where you did the who, what, where, when, why, and how the first few days of school when I ask those questions. So if those are in a different spot, don't worry. Just make a new document and attach it to this because I'm going to have everyone take notes on the video. So you will need your Chromebook out as you're watching the video, which I know is different. But I'm going to have GoGuardian on to make sure that everybody's where they're supposed to be. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start GoGuardian.
I'll be on it for a second. I'm still working on the words and stuff.
You're still finishing your words? Okay.
And the yards.
That's okay. That's guys, something like that's fine. You'll have to be on the classroom, but you don't need to be watching another video or doing something like that when we're doing this together. Okay, so again, you will need to make, if you don't already have a copy of the document there, the journal, you'll need to make a document and go ahead and attach it to this assignment. I see some have already turned it in. So I'm going to go ahead and return those to those students so that they can add it on there. Okay.
Immediately trying to use a vocab word and immediately forgot it.
I do it sort of with the ideas like the almost said decide.
Don't decide me.
Don't decide.
Okay, guys. So my virtual students, we are going to be watching the videos. If you see them right here on the screen, there are 4, and they're about 15 minutes each. So I've dated them to what I think that we'll get to them. I think that we'll get through all those 3 today and have that one for Wednesday if there's time after Miss Little leaves. So you'll be writing 5 facts from the video. I'm talking to my virtual, but also everyone else as well. Okay. We're looking at these first few videos here. This is the Bible of text that we'll start reading. Probably won't get to it until next week. And then I have another link at the bottom that we'll use also that's got some really cool things on it for Beowulf. So I just thought I'd give y'all another couple minutes. I know not everyone's finished with the sentences before we start the videos. Okay. Does anybody have any questions regarding journal in your 5 notes? Typically what I do, he has the text on the screen. So I will stop the video and let you have time to write key points down. Typically we typically as a class write the same notes down. So I will stop that and let you write them down, type them down in your notes. So a little bit about vocab tests. Vocab tests were excellent. I don't have them in e-school yet. And what I did, there are 53 points possible bonus, 53 points. So it was 45 was a perfect score. If you did bonus, you got to 5 points. That's awesome. And then I rounded it 3 points because we had an issue with the test. You remember it was wanted you to add a number, so I just gave everybody 3 points. So everyone has 3 points, but if you did all 5 words, you have 5. So your top score is a 53, and a 53 and a few makes that score. That is excellent. You're right. That is so good.
The problem I had is that I was literally like half my phone, and then I was like, oh, I remember what one of those words means.
But you got it in.
No, I didn't.
You didn't get it
It
on?
was the one that I got wrong.
Oh.
It was the one I put potato for.
Oh, that's right.
Don't ever watch the movie Available, by the way.
That's not a no.
That is a nose. Olfactory.
Remember that time that, wait, were you in that class?
I don't know, continue the story, and I reminded me of it. Remember that time where that thing, wait, were you there?
I was in this Abby's class. Yeah, blew up the wall socket.
Oh, yes, I remember.
Yeah, just think-
It was not good.
So
Okay, guys, I'm giving everybody a couple more minutes to finish their
that's what happened the
sentences.
last time I used one.
So if you're caught up,
Cheers.
if you're caught up, make sure you have your journal, your document ready and attach it to the journal so that you'll be able to type your notes. I'm going to be checking that. You're getting points for this. So make sure that you, and we used to do these, we used to handwrite all these, but now we're trying to get away from physical things, so we're putting it in our journal.
Get away from emotional things like attachments and favorites
Remember when they did that?
and English.
A while ago. So remember when they did a while ago? They went away from person and they won't do it.
Yeah, and then they were like, why can't you sign this? Like, why can't you sign your paper? Like, oh,
Don't worry about it.
Is it
What?
me?
What about him?
I think I'm choking.
Me?
Go ahead.
So Luther?
Go ahead. Here.
And Luther?
What did you say?
So guys, listen, so all you
Luther,
need to be on is your
I was
journal.
writing there first.
I'm there.
Oh, give it.
My students at home, I need to go ahead.
Find a new spot. Oh.
You know what? Bye.
He sees better with it on though.
Just delete mine.
No, I'm down here. Who turned my golden? What did you do? Go away.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? Sadie, Madison,
Oh, hey.
Alexandria, have any questions? Okay. So y'all are finishing your sentences and getting the document ready on your journal. Okay, we're waiting just a moment. We'll start the video.
Tracker's done.
What?
I'm glad you it says you're attacking this document.
She said it's right.
You did what? It's rigged. I was laughing.
So then you're incorrect.
Tracker, you shut up. You're not part of the count.
I could be.
No, you didn't.
I did.
We did the spirit. Okay.
I will burn you at this school. For religious reasons.
Are you welcome to fire today?
Okay, guys. Well, tell me something. We got people finishing their sentences. it's a good time to check your email.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you can't do that unless you're on your phone, but your personal email, your school email, it's a good time to do that. You haven't done that.
Why can't we check our personal email?
You don't give them great ideas, but I don't think it'll let you.
I mean, I could probably, well, not because you gotta have permission and yada, yada, yada.
For what?
Let's get to that.
Oh, man. I thought they'd forget that. What is it?
Today's the 14th.
Okay, I want to remind everybody on the sentences also, guys, there will be a couple of times this semester that I'll excuse and give perfect scores to those who do their sentences every time. It cannot just be every blue moon, or I'm hoping she won't notice. It has to be every time, every
What did you
word.
do? I'm gonna slap you. I really will.
And it would stink if you just had a few words you didn't know. That would be awful, so.
No. Oh, God, the desk moves so far. I'm just laughing. Y'all been warned.
Yes, guys, now remember this video, this is taken out of Nashville, and this is a doctor at a private school. He actually they teach British Lit in 10th grade over there. So this is his podcast for students. So he actually has his kids read Bibles and recite it, do different things. So we are, not going to quite that far, but we are going to be watching it and reading part of the epic poem, and certainly learning why our English language is so difficult to learn. Why it changes so much. And why are there so
Difficult
many
doesn't
different
begin with
words.
script.
That's right, aggravating at times, right? So, okay. And then, what is this time, what are we supposed to be doing?
Try not to do each other.
Finishing, if some people haven't finished their sentences though. I've got 9 sentences on the last word today. There was one of the 9 kids in class, so.
Sure.
Giving you time to prepare.
Oh, yeah, they're right here.
If you're finished with that, you should go ahead and have your journal document open, ready to go. If you've done that, you can check your email. If you've done that, why don't you start looking around and see if you're interested in doing after you graduate? Go ahead and look
I like
on
that play.
some colleges, graduate schools, things like that.
I just need to start with some scholarships, so.
Yeah, maybe.
Yes, maybe.
I have a lot of emails I haven't been reading, and none of them are really good. No, but why didn't you send me? Oh, wait, okay, never mind. I know this. So like Paul, Marquez, not important.
You just need to get in the habit of checking it every day.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm leaving that on, by the way.
Guys, I want you to check your school and your personal every day. It is very important that you get in that habit. I know you think, well, that's weird, but
I mean,
you need to do it.
not. I mean, no, you have no life. No, you don't. You really don't.
I get my email myself,
Good. Check that out.
Good for you.
but I also have 4 different emails, so.
Oh, wow.
Personal emails.
That was my thing. I really do.
I'm not gonna put my personal email in here because I don't feel like getting in trouble for something y'all think's inappropriate.
Yes.
I get D&D stuff.
So I can.
There's a talk through about-
I will be able to check it like after I graduate.
This one you
You
just-
should do personal email.
I already have one, but
I mean,
you don't really know where you can.
it depends on what the message is.
And technically, I think some Discords are saved from like this. Some messages from Discord.
So what?
Yeah, some of my messages from Discord, I think they might be saved. You know what Discord is? Discord is. I think someone messaged me saying that. I don't know. I don't think so. Just again.
11.
I don't feel like explaining conversation.
Yeah, I can only imagine what y'all talking about.
Sarah doesn't use Discord. Sarah doesn't use Discord.
Have you even talked to Gavin and Brody?
Nope. Because none of them touch me. None of them touch me, and honestly, most of them don't care. Most of them don't care. Track me.
How much did you get request?
Hey guys, I feel like a lot of people, we're just not using our time, so I'm gonna go ahead and start the video. If I start now, we can probably get in 2, if not 3 of them today. So again, what are you expected to do? You're expected to take notes. You need a minimum of 5 notes per video. And I will stop the video because usually as a class, you guys are attracted to the same kind of notes. So we'll know to stop it and let you get that down, okay? Questions? Does everyone know what to do? Okay, so virtual, one more time really fast. Virtual people, if for some reason it is not doing well, which it should be fine, just send me an email, let me know, and I've got the links posted there that you all can click and watch those, okay? But you know what we're supposed to be doing, okay? No one has questions? Okay, guys, here we go.
Before we begin, I ask that you give the material the time and the attention that it deserves. Remember, I reserve the right to give you a pop quiz on any homework assignment, including this video podcast. Please resist the temptation to multitask and close all other programs on your computer, except those that you might use for note-taking. For homework, take notes as you watch and listen, stopping the video and reviewing it as necessary. Identify 5 points in the video that you think are especially important. Formulate 1 or 2 big ideas that you think are supported by the points that you identify. Be prepared to share your findings during class discussion and to apply what you've learned to your reading of the poem. Let's get started. BritLit 10 is a chronological survey of British literature. It begins with the Anglo-Saxon period, which spans from the 5th to the 11th century, and it moves forward in time with extended stops in the Middle Ages, the Elizabethan era of the 16th century, the Romantic era of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and the Victorian era of the middle of the 19th century. The final stop is the early 20th century. By the time that school ends in May, we will have covered nearly 1,200 years of British literary history. The first text that we will read is an Anglo-Saxon epic poem called Beowulf. It was composed in the last 3 centuries of the first millennium, and it is one of the earliest examples of poetry in the English language. Beowulf is an exciting poem, but it is also a poem with a long and complex history. Before we begin to read Beowulf, we have to spend some time understanding who the people were that produced it. There were people living on the island of Britannia for nearly 5,000 years by the time that the Anglo-Saxons arrived there from Scandinavia in the middle of the 5th century. They would go on to dominate the island for about 600 years, until the middle of the 11th century. So before we turn our attention to one of the most important poems that they would produce, indeed, one of the most important poems in all of English literature, we have to ask ourselves, who were the Anglo-Saxons? And what kind of a culture did they have? The Anglo-Saxons were a dramatic warrior society that emphasized bravery, honor, and glory in battle. They were a patriarchal society based on the concepts of kinship, comitatus, and fraternity. Let's look at those 3 terms. Kinship has a couple of different meanings. In one sense, it is the relationship between an individual and the other members of the tribe. More often than not, the members of the tribe were related, either by blood or by marriage. But even when they weren't, anyone who was in your tribe was considered to be your kin. And in this sense of the term, the single most important claim of kinship that one could make was to his king. There was another sense of the term, and that concerned one's ancestry as it was traced through the patriarchs of the family, your father, your grandfathers, your great-grandfathers, and so on. In the Beowulf poem, we will see characters routinely proclaiming bonds of kinship, identifying themselves as Canute's cousin, or King Fubar's knight, or Fansbarn's son.
That might be a really good thing to write down. Kinship, definition of kinship. You'll go to your password. Again, we're putting our notes under the topic of journals. You'll need to get if you don't have the document where you made your notes on the who, what, where, when, why, how, you'll need to make a fresh document. So I don't know that you.
What?
You don't believe you did that. So just go to the copy of the new document and attach it to this. Public journal. Yes. Okay. You just got it today. So guys, did anybody write down what who the Anglo-Saxons were, how they're defined? Your race, that's exactly right. Man, war society. Oh, patriarch, yes, we're gonna keep that on females. Yes, they are patriarch, which means they are the man. Comes to matriarchal. It's probably you can put it in your own words. You don't have to type it down verbatim, or if you want to, you may do that as well. Okay? It's really good for you to be able to put it in your own words, but that makes sense. Checking my virtual ask how they're doing on that. I think that there should not be a problem since it's. Guys, you're doing okay on the video? Is it working fine? Okay. We'll just pause just for a second, finishing up the notes on this page. feel like you learn better when you take the notes and you write handwriting or you type them.
I remember what I had.
I know that. That's true.
No, it really
Really
doesn't.
good when you type. You know,
No, you may think I'm kidding, I mean.
Yeah, he's being honest, like, I'm
I'm
being.
being
one
dead
with
serious.
Him in algebra last year. He
You
got
can
me in
ask my
trouble.
father. That's why she let me sit in front of the class and put my hat on.
Like, he can't say.
Yeah.
He can't see or hear without it either.
No, I just don't pay attention. I don't really care. I got my hat.
That's the conscience. He's on my, I got to
It's like an addiction, actually, you
Yeah.
Like,
You're
it's
making
something
me
to
addiction, it's a bad addiction too.
know, he started like,
The, which is all kind of shows.
See, some people have an addiction to alcohol or something like that. Mine's a hat.
I'm gonna say that.
No, no, this is-
That's fine.
Alcohol.
Well,
I
so like, if you put.
Wait, hold on.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to do my first.
Is everybody ready to move on?
Yes, ma'am.
Wait, you said he was an English professor?
He teaches.
Comitatus was a dramatic power arrangement in which a king was obliged to rule in consultation with his thanes. A thane is simply an Anglo-Saxon knight. The arrangement required thanes to swear absolute fidelity to their king, who, in exchange, would bestow upon his thanes land and money and jewelry and war gear and special privileges and other benefits. Comitatus was, in a very real way, the glue that held Anglo-Saxon warrior society together. It bound the king to each of his thanes, it bound each of the thanes to the king, and it bound each thane to his fellow thanes. Each one worked for the well-being and the benefit of the nobility class, and for the well-being and the benefit of the tribe as a whole. What this meant is that Anglo-Saxon society was a deeply fraternal society, one based on the close social bonds of the men in the tribe. These men lived together, and they worked together, and they died together. The actions and words of any individual reflected upon and affected the entire group.
Do we have to put down all the highlighted words?
No.
The well-being.
We're having fun. So now I'm stopping on Comitatus. I had several who are writing this down. If you want to write this one down. I will be honest, I think the best notes are at the beginning because he does have them written out. If you wait till later, they're not necessarily written out as much because he's going to show you some maps. And that's kind of my eyes glaze over on the maps, but anyway, it's not important, it's just geography, and he'll show you different pictures, and so it's probably more going to enjoy the get your notes taken at the beginning, that way you can kind of enjoy the rest of the podcast. It is recorded,
Go ahead, just. But obviously we got to go through this building stuff, so we hear something like this is an old business, it doesn't matter based on the fact that the rules never stay the same, it's changing consistently. So it's never any like, hey, someone has to supplement sooner or later. They're missing out as part of life. I'm only Jump, jump, jump. Why is it jump? That's the jump.
Oh my God.
My name. Hello.
Hey guys, am I ready to go on?
Yes, ma'am.
and the benefit of the nobility class, and for the well-being and the benefit of the tribe as a whole. What this meant is that Anglo-Saxon society was a deeply fraternal society, one based on the close social bonds of the men in the tribe. These men lived together, and they worked together, and they died together. The actions and words of any individual reflected upon and affected the entire group.
I did not write it down.
That's more.
I don't sure the memory. They're so cool.
Anglo-Saxon warriors were motivated by four main things, which, in reality, was one thing: glory. Glory for one's king, glory for one's ancestors, glory for one's tribe, and glory for oneself. The pursuit of glory determined everything that they said and did, both on and off the battlefield.
If you're writing that down, notice the repetition of glory. Just do glory king, glory ancestors, tribe, and oneself. You don't have to write it just like that, you can say
I don't know, I'm looking it up.
Wow, you're very on.
It's stuck in my head.
What is
It's
still?
been 3 weeks since my last game, so I'm like, I don't know. They have you chopped up and made into soup.
people that have like, it's nice to have it.
Yeah, I'll be able to focus on, because, I just don't focus on, moving on.
Really? Well, sorry, man, you can take it. Oh, is it the
Yes, I'm doing.
Hi.
Because Anglo-Saxon society was a warrior society, violence was a fact of everyday life. The bonds of fraternity demanded that any death suffered at the hands of an outsider be avenged. Revenge killings were the order of the day, pitting tribe against tribe, and a single death could unleash a chain of violence that could go on for generations. It was precisely because revenge killings were so routine that the Anglo-Saxons devised a rough form of justice that could stanch the flow of blood. This was known as weregild. Weregild was a legally binding arrangement in Germanic societies, wherein money was paid to the family of the victim of a murder or injury by the offender. The exact amount of the payment was usually tied to the victim's station in the tribe of which he was a part. The more important the victim, the more money the offender had to pay. So the ties of fraternity was strong in Anglo-Saxon, tied to the victim's.
Anyone need to screen before this one? Revenge killing, do you want to do that? I don't have that now.
Oh, that's just one word.
Yeah.
And this is legally.
Yes, absolutely.
I really, yeah, I'm not scared.
Like the bow.
Huh?
So I love the bow.
The bow is so over. Bounders.
The poison arrows. Like you get the extended bow.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
last for like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It'd be
Or
more,
it's just like, if I have shot you,
it'd be
you
more,
start biting your will.
Our, also like the one that causes blindness because they just shoot.
I got to finish with world guild or not? No? Yes? Okay.
Station in the tribe of which he was a part. The more important the victim, the more money the offender had to pay. So the ties of fraternity were strong in Anglo-Saxon society, and when the men weren't on the battlefield, they would spend their time in the king's mead hall. Now, mead is an alcoholic beverage. It's made with honey, and it has a pretty high alcohol content. Drinking was a very important part of Anglo-Saxon society, so it's not surprising that their favorite beverage was the namesake for the place where they spent most of their time. In early Germanic society, the mead hall was a building with a large central room where the king and his thanes would feast, drink, play games, and socialize with the women. The mead hall was a symbol of the king's power, and because it was where he spent most of his time, it was considered the safest place in the kingdom.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, Miss Riggs, you were doing some great stuff. Yes, it is. It's over.
Actually fit.
It was very ruined,
Right.
but other than like being there, you like see in the past. So, yeah, and it was very like hearing all the people cheering and stuff. At one point, I actually heard of that phone, so like it would have the key get everybody's attention and Saxon, but everybody was cheering like I guess I guess the
Me too.
same what about the girl thing or something. And then, just being there. You know what just brings back?
I got you not limited to 5, but 5 is on the spot. I'd like to have, okay? And again, once the beginning of the best. You just get.
All right, took all those.
Are we ready to go?
Yeah.
Yes.
What? Sorry. I thought you were listening. I thought he was listening.
The Anglo-Saxons were a polytheistic society, worshippers of pagan gods and goddesses taken with them from Scandinavia, gods and goddesses that were Norse in origin. On the left, we see Thor in the days before he became an Avenger. On the right, Freya, goddess of sexuality and fertility. Of the 7 days of the week, the names of 6 come to us from the Anglo-Saxon language. The word sun sounds the same in Anglo-Saxon as it does in modern English, the language that we speak. The same is true of moon, and from these two words, the Anglo-Saxons give us Sunnundaich and Monundaich, Sunday and Monday. Tu was the Anglo-Saxon god of war, and he gives us Tuesdag, or Tuesday. Woden, the supreme Anglo-Saxon god, gives us Wodensdag, or Wednesday. Thorsdag comes from, well, Thor, and Freya gives us Friasdag, or Friday. In Old Norse, one of Anglo-Saxon's several parent languages, the day after Friasdag is Lyrdagr, or washing day, not a particularly appealing name for the last day of the week. The Anglo-Saxons wisely set aside the Old Norse name, choosing in its place Saturnusdag, a day named after the Roman god Saturn.
Want to pause anybody?
Sunnundaich, Monundaich, Tuesdag, Wodensdag, Thorsdag, Friasdag. The names of 6 out of the 7 days of the week in modern English come to us from the Anglo-Saxons, worshippers of pagan gods and goddesses. And as pagans, the Anglo-Saxons had a deep connection to the concept of fate, or destiny as it was determined by those gods. The Anglo-Saxon word for fate is weird. The modern English word weird, as in strange or odd, comes to us from the Anglo-Saxon word for fate. Yet even as the Anglo-Saxons worshipped their pagan gods, they were also the modern
So funny. Oh, that's
Like,
not
what are you doing?
We need to pronounce
That's my new word.
today's school week like this.
What did you do?
Every
No, why?
rest of the school year. Today is Jamon Day.
Did you get it written down?
Well, I
Please,
don't.
Dave, what? You get all set written down?
All 7 days written down?
I got to write it down, so.
Yes, ma'am.
I only had one time.
An English word weird, as in strange or odd, comes to us from the Anglo-Saxon word for fate. Yet even as the Anglo-Saxons worshipped their pagan gods, they were also among the earliest converts to Christianity, a development that would have important implications for the Beowulf poem. As you might have noticed, the Anglo-Saxon language sounds a lot like German, which makes sense since their ancestral tribes were, as you will soon see, Germanic. And while the language that the Anglo-Saxons spoke is clearly Germanic in origin, it is also the very earliest form of English. The Anglo-Saxons' time as a society was relatively short, but they left behind the seeds of the most expressive and widespread language that the world has ever known. Finally, the Anglo-Saxons were great warriors, but they were also great artists. As you will learn in the next podcast, they were expert craftsmen of jewelry and metal, but they were masters of poetry and storytelling as well. With that as our overview, let us take a look at how the Anglo-Saxons came to the island of Britannia, for this has important implications for the Beowulf poem. The Anglo-Saxon period begins in the middle of the 5th century, and it ends some 600 years later in the year 1066. But the Anglo-Saxon story starts well before the 5th century. It starts 400 years earlier, in the middle of the 1st century. In the year 43, the Romans stage an occupation of the island of Britannia, an occupation that would last for the next 350 years. Roman historians writing at the time have little to say about daily life under Roman rule, but it is clear that the Romans built roads and cities, and archaeological data suggests that the Romans routinely intermingled and often married into the indigenous population, a tribe called the Britons, after whom the occupiers named the island soon after their arrival. In the early 5th century, the Roman Empire falls. It doesn't happen overnight, and its causes are many. The only cause that concerns us is the Germanic tribes that have assembled along the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire. The Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Lombardy, the Alemanni, the Burgundians, the Franks. These Germanic tribes had exerted pressure on the border for hundreds of years, and until the middle of the 4th century, the Romans had been able to keep them out. By the year 375, however, these Germanic tribes had begun to make successful raids into the Roman territories, and when the empire begins to fall in the decades that follow, the trickle of Germanic tribes that crossed the border became a flood. The Germanic tribes move ever westward. In the year 410, the Visigoths sack Rome, and over the course of the next several decades, the rest of the empire falls. As it does, the Roman military and the Roman administrators abandon the island of Britannia. By the beginning of the 6th century, most of what was once the Roman Empire was in Germanic control. Now, most of these Germanic tribes had moved westward across the continent, across the land, but 3 of them moved westward across the North Sea. The Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes arrive in Britannia from the part of Northern Europe now known as Scandinavia. Over the course of the next 5 centuries, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes would settle throughout central and eastern Britannia, where they would intermarry, wage war with each other, and drive the indigenous tribes ever westward into what is now Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Over the course of several generations, the Angles and the Saxons merge, and then they absorb the Jutes. By the 7th century, a number of major and minor kingdoms emerge. Despite substantial and sometimes bitter personal and political differences, each kingdom thinks of itself as part of a single nation, Angleland, the land of the Angles. Anglish culture, Anglo-Saxon culture, would dominate Britannia for the next 4 centuries. In the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries, the Danes and the Vikings stage a series of raids that intend to take control of the island away from the Anglo-Saxons. To a degree, they are successful. The Danish at one point actually control a substantial amount of what was once Anglo-Saxon territory in a region then known as the Danelagh. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms unify under a single king, King Alfred, in an attempt to drive the Danes and Vikings off of the island. But over the course of the 10th and the early 11th century, it is uncertain that the Anglo-Saxons will prevail. But the matter is settled in 1066 when a different Germanic tribe, the Normans from the north coast of what is now France, expel the Vikings and the Danes from the island and conquer the Anglo-Saxons, thereby bringing to an end the Anglo-Saxon period in British history and the dominance of Anglo-Saxon culture. So, if that's who the Anglo-Saxons were, then what is the Beowulf poem about? It might not surprise you to learn that it is the story of a Germanic warrior. Its setting is Scandinavia in the 5th century, which is to say that it takes place in the part of the world that the Anglo-Saxons' ancestors left at precisely the time that they left it to come to the island of Britannia. Beowulf, as you will learn, is a warrior's warrior. He fights monsters and dragons. He makes women swoon, and he commands the respect and admiration of every man he meets. He fights bravely in pursuit of glory for himself, for his people, for his ancestors, and for his king. That concludes this BritLit 10 video podcast. In Lesson 2, we will build upon the knowledge of this podcast to take a look at the history.
Okay, so guys, before we start the second podcast, key things that you wrote down. What did we write down for, what is it? A lot of things. Okay, so some of the early things on, what did you write down? What is it? All right, the definition of kinship, and so what is kinship? Good.
Relatives of the tribe.
Good, as opposed to matriarchal, which would be the women. All right, very good. What else did you write down?
Fraternity.
Fraternity, definition of fraternity means?
The closely bonds among the men of the tribe.
Sure. All right, and you probably wrote down comitatus? You didn't write down comitatus? What is comitatus?
Oh, yeah, the king of the tribe. I'm sorry, the king of the tribe. And the thing, also wrote that down, but more of a warrior than a knight. You got that wrong.
Okay, so the rule of comitatus was what? Yes.
A Germanic power arrangement in which the king is obligated to rule in consultation with his thanes or knights. The arrangement required thanes to swear absolute fidelity to their king, who in exchange would bestow upon his thanes land, money, jewelry, war gears, special privileges, and other benefits.
That's perfect. So it was this arrangement that they would do whatever the king needed, the king would take care of them. Very excellent. What else did you write down? You write down weird? W-I-R-D? What is weird? Absolutely. Why would this be important in such a fighting bunch of people?
Because if you die, it was made by the gods.
Perfect. And that was, that was all right, as long as they were going down fighting, not being a coward.
That was your most honorable way to go.
Very good. All right, so after weird, what else did you guys put down? Anything else?
But their motivation.
Okay. Oh, meat hall. Yes, I would like to go to the meat hall, and that is their safe
You said their
place.
motive.
And he said it was their motivation, right?
Oh, I said I also wrote down.
Okay.
What you need?
You said you asked the question. What's her name?
I don't remember. I'll stick it up on it. Yes.
Also, Freya was the goddess of nature.
Rita, yes, sexuality, and that's where we get our name.
She was also
Friday.
nature, not
Nature?
just
Sure.
sexuality.
So the dates for Glee, did you know
What's
that,
fertility?
that they all five of them, 5 of the 6 came from? Yes.
I did not.
Okay, and then I guess Laundry Day would be very exciting, so. yeah.
But it was for them. It was for them. That was the only day they could actually do laundry.
Okay, guys, so I'm gonna go ahead and start podcast 2. So 5 notes for podcast 2 because we've got about 15 minutes of class with a little extra. So we're gonna go ahead and start podcast 2 for this one. More good stuff. Dr. Masalo.
In this computer graphic, you
Uh-oh.
can see the impression that the home made on the earth below it,
Uh-oh.
a product of the
I don't want to show you something here yet.
soon more.
Sorry, guys. Here we go.
Hello, welcome to this Britlit 10 video podcast on Beowulf. This is lesson 2, the history of the Beowulf poem. Before we begin, I ask that you give the material the time and the attention that it deserves. I reserve the right to give you a pop quiz on any homework assignment, including this video podcast. You may also be held responsible for this material on more substantial assessments, such as essays, tests, and the semester exam. Please resist the temptation to multitask and close all of the programs on your computer except those that you might use for note-taking. For homework, take notes as you watch and listen, stopping the video and reviewing it as necessary. Be prepared to share your findings during class discussion and to apply what you've learned to your reading of the poem. Let's begin. We are going to start today with a reminder that Britannia had been part of the Roman Empire since the 1st century. When the empire falls in the 5th century, a host of Germanic tribes pour in across the eastern frontier. Most of these tribes go west across the continent, across the land, but 3 tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, go by sea, sailing from what is now Scandinavia and arriving on the eastern coast of Britannia in the middle of the 5th century. Over the course of the next 2 centuries, these 3 tribes fight each other and intermarry. Eventually, a number of major and minor kingdoms emerge. These kingdoms are independent, but their people also assume a collective identity, referring to their home as England and to themselves as English. We know them as the Anglo-Saxons. They and their culture would dominate the island until the middle of the 11th century. Beowulf is the story of a Germanic warrior who lives in Scandinavia in the 5th century. It was first told by the Anglo-Saxons sometime in the 8th century. It is worth noting that the story takes place in the same part of the world that the Anglo-Saxons' ancestors came from, and that it takes place at the same point in history as when those ancestors first began to migrate to the island of Britannia. Beowulf is very much a story told by immigrants about the land from which they came and the ancestors who lived there. Originally, Beowulf was an oral poem, which means that it was told from memory and passed along from person to person, from tribe to tribe, and from generation to generation. It was told at social gatherings, dinners, and weddings, and parties, and other celebrations, and it was told by trained storytellers and ordinary people alike. Oral poetry is a form of vernacular art, art that is made by and for ordinary people as part of their everyday lives. Oral poetry uses simple, everyday language that anyone could understand, even when it's telling an extraordinary story. And this is exactly what the Beowulf poem is, an extraordinary story told by people in Anglo-Saxon society as part of their everyday lives.
Vernacular art.
Let's go.
Did you go?
Anyone could tell a story from memory, but some people were better at it than others. And the best storytellers of all were the Shopes, the Anglo-Saxon oral poets. Each tribe had a Shope, and the Shope was its entertainer and historian. He would recite his stories from memory, often accompanying himself with a lyre, which is a small stringed instrument similar to a harp. You will remember from the previous podcast that Anglo-Saxon society was a fraternal society, that there was a close bond between the warriors, that they lived together, they fought together, and they died together. If you look at the image on your screen, you will see that the Shope is illustrated in red, and he's standing amongst the men gathered around the fire. The king is on the far left, and he and the other warriors have their attention focused on the Shope. The Shope would tell stories of legends from the past and sing about the news of the present day, including battles and the deeds of members of the tribe. The Shope stories often had a moral component to them, offering models of good behavior to which the warriors could aspire and offering models of bad behavior that they were to avoid. In this way, the Shope was instrumental in the creation of a fraternal bond among the members of the tribe. It is important to understand that precisely because he could offer models of positive and negative behavior, unify the tribe, and immortalize the brave deeds of its members in stories that could be passed along from person to person, tribe to tribe, and generation to generation, the Shope enjoyed a position of immense power, prestige, and respect in Anglo-Saxon society. His ability with language, his skill with words, was considered as important as any warrior's skill with a sword, and just as manly. In the Beowulf poem, the Shope becomes a character in his own story, and we will see time and again that the story he tells is one of the power of language. Beowulf was an oral poem, which means that it was similar to a game of telephone. Each time that it was retold, it changed a little, and over time, it changed a lot. If you've ever played telephone as a kid, you know exactly how this works. You whisper something into a friend's ear, and then she whispers what she's heard into another friend's ear. That friend passes it along to another friend, and so on down the line, so that what the last person hears is only remotely similar to what you first said. The lesson that this children's game teaches us is that oral stories are susceptible to change, that as they are passed along from person to person, from generation to generation, and from place to place, the words change, meanings change, people mishear what was said, or they don't remember it entirely, or they introduce new words that were never there in the first place. And this is exactly what happens to the Beowulf poem, except that it's not just a classroom full of kids on a school day afternoon, but tens of thousands of people over the course of hundreds and hundreds of years. So that by the time that we get to the end of the first millennium, the Beowulf story as it is told differs significantly from the story that was first told in the middle of the 8th century. And that's the nature of oral poetry. It's one big game of telephone. And if we're going to think of Beowulf as a big game of telephone, we have to pay close attention to one particular development that was taking place in the island of Britannia as the game was being played, and that is the emergence of Christianity. As it turns out, this would have an immense impact on the Beowulf poem. In order to fully understand the Beowulf poem, we need to turn the clock back just a little bit to the beginning of the 4th century. It was then that the Roman Emperor Constantine issued a proclamation known as the Edict of Milan, which sought to promote religious tolerance throughout the empire. Now, the Edict of Milan was a general proclamation, but it was really meant for the Christians, who had been targets of persecution for over 2 centuries. Constantine himself was, for both personal and political reasons, increasingly sympathetic to Christianity, and he himself would eventually convert. The Edict of Milan had the effect of decriminalizing Christianity, and its implications were enormous. Over the next few centuries, Christianity would go from being a minor religion practiced in secret and fear to the most powerful and widespread religion that the continent had ever known.
Going to help you understand when we're reading Bible, one line they're praying to God, the next line they're writing on themselves and drinking on their knees. So it's the commingling of the pagan and the Christian. Every line. Yeah.
In the year 597, the Roman monk Augustine arrives on the island of Britannia. He's been sent there by Pope Gregory with the task of converting the pagan tribes, including the Anglo-Saxons, to Christianity. Now, there are 2 Augustines in history. The one that you've probably heard of is Augustine of Hippo. I think he gets some love in Western Civ and AP Europe. The Augustine that is sent to Britannia would become Augustine of Canterbury, the first Archbishop of Canterbury. They are 2 different guys living about 150 years apart, and you should do your best not to confuse them. Augustine arrives in 597, and his first prospect is an Anglo-Saxon king, King Ethelbert. Now, Ethelbert is the most powerful king in all of Anglo-Saxon Britain, and Augustine is able to convert him, perhaps because Ethelbert's wife, whose name is Bertha, was already a Christian. At any rate, when Ethelbert converts to Christianity, his subjects follow suit. Soon more Christian missionaries arrive, and as the word gets out that the most powerful king in Britain has converted to Christianity, more Anglo-Saxon kings and subjects do the same. Over the course of the next 4 centuries, Anglo-Saxon paganism and Christianity will come to coexist side by side on the island of Britannia. That's probably gonna be a really good place to stop. It's almost time for the bell to kind of get you guys settled. I'll just put that down that we can continue there
I just realized this.
after Miss Little. Okay, so virtual, you guys doing okay?
I can't see.
Everybody okay? All right. So I've just stopped the video there at 9:17. We'll continue there on Wednesday. Wednesday, Miss Little will be in at the beginning of the course, the period. And then after she finishes talking to you guys, we'll continue with the vocab and with this. Okay? Does anybody have no questions? No? I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording.
I like
That Christian life.